I was born in Denmark in 1947 and grew up in Copenhagen as the middle child between two brothers. The family of my childhood was quite typical of the 1950s. My father performed the traditional male provider role while my mother acted as a caregiver. Being the only girl and a bit precocious at that, I became sensitive to differences in the ways girls and boys were treated and to things that I perceived as unfair. For instance, when I was 9 years old, we lived in an apartment building where there was an interior courtyard where all the kids would play. Usually the boys would play soccer or football as we call it, and the girls would either sit and talk or play games such as hopscotch or jump rope. It was very gendered. One time I was playing football with the boys and I recall my father seeing me rushing about and getting all red in the face, and I remember him sort of laughing. I definitely felt that playing football wasn't the appropriate thing for me to do. That moment represents one of the first times I realized I was defying expectations and behaving in a somewhat atypical way for a girl of my time, and it set a pattern that has influenced the rest of my life. After my first 20 years in Copenhagen, I went to France to attend courses on French language and civilization at the Sorbonne. I met my first husband there and followed him to Kyoto, Japan the following year. He studied Japanese religions and later taught French at a Japanese university. Intermittently, I taught French, English, and even Danish. Our first child was born in Kyoto, and this time was difficult for me. I recall struggling and thinking, is this going to be the rest of my life? I was a bit lonely and didn't find being a full-time wife and mother to be all that rewarding. I missed the freedom and the intellectual stimulation of my earlier life. It would be some years before I'd read Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique and recognize my situation. However, once my daughter was in daycare and I started teaching again and taking classes learning Japanese, my life became much happier. I always imagined we would be back in Europe, but after 6 years and one more child who was born in Denmark, my husband got a teaching job at the University of Colorado Boulder, and I completed a BA in economics and Japanese in 2 years. Subsequently, my husband got a job at Cornell, and I enrolled in graduate school in economics. After some years, however, the marriage fell apart and we divorced. Some tumultuous years followed, but I eventually married Jeff, a fellow Cornell student who had taken a job in the economics department at Colgate, and I joined the economics faculty as well. After giving birth to my third child and having finally completed my thesis, I was ready to bring my feminism and the discipline of economics together. Frustrated by the way women's paid and especially unpaid economic contributions were ignored by the discipline and disappointed by the lack of attention to issues of gender, I desperately sought out like-minded colleagues who also wanted to expand the economics discipline to include critical feminist voices. This led us to establish feminist economics as a field of study and connected me and my research to an international network of collaborators with whom I have maintained close ties to this day. My work has brought me to many parts of the world, and it has been my hope to bring the experience and understanding of this larger world into the lives of my students by leading study groups to London and to Denmark any number of times in my 30-year-long career at Colgate. After I retired, I have stayed in Hamilton, New York, where our home remains family central and we welcome our big family of children and grandchildren for games, birthdays, holidays, and plain fun. I spend many of my days listening to Danish books on tape on my walk, reading the world news, doing yoga, and connecting with peers in the Hamilton community. I feel lucky to have had such a rich and a rewarding life with many travels, interesting work, and a great family.